This meeting is being recorded.
Well, that's just fine. So welcome everybody to the Detroit Solar Stories March edition. 4 days till spring. Getting very excited about that as well. We host Solar Stories. I'm assuming many of you have been on Solar Stories before, but this is through Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, a statewide organization representing solar owners, suppliers, businesses, and people of interest to promote solar energy in Michigan. This is a Thursday night event. Every Thursday night, you can see a different solar story. We have Detroit Solar Stories on the third Thursday of every month. It is sponsored by Eagle, our state energy organization, plus McNaughton McKay, Homeland Solar, Iron Ridge, and Harvest Solar. So thank you to the sponsors for helping to support this. I'm Diane Van Buren. I'm a co-owner of D2 Solar in Detroit and also a board member of Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. We have speakers tonight. Ron Eglash. Ron is a professor at University of Michigan who just has a fascinating story. I'll just put it at that, on how he sees communications as part of the ritual of tradition. I'm not going to say it the right way, but how solar actually is part of those traditional methods. And then also John Jevahirian, shout out to John with Michigan Solar Solutions. And I have to say, John has been a faithful member of our Detroit Committee for Renewable Energy for 3 years now. So great guy, and I really appreciate working with him, and he volunteers with his work here in Detroit. So we really appreciate that. We're going to be talking about the African Bead Museum, a great jewel in Detroit. I know we have many jewels, but this one is truly a jewel that Ron is going to share information on how the whole project developed with University of Michigan students, as well as how to integrate solar. And John will be talking about the solar implementation as well. Ron, do you feel comfortable just starting with it?
Sure.
Okay. Well, take it away.
All right. Let me make sure I can do a share screen here. And hit my little slide button. And there's our bead museum. So we were hoping to get Dobbles tonight. He hasn't made it yet. Maybe he'll be coming in late. But Dobbles runs that wonderful little bead gallery, and he has this beautiful outdoor sculpture garden where he's been putting all these, he sort of takes, discarded waste, right, and creates these African-inspired sculptures out of that. And I was chatting with him at one point about the origins of these African beads. Some of them are made from, ceramics and things, but some are grown, they are not made. And so I'm really fascinated by this use of seed plants to create these little beads. And you'll see, just all sorts of different uses of these seeds in African crafts. Now, I do a lot of field work in Africa. My first book was called African Fractals, about fractal structure in African design. And one of my favorite places to go is this little village called Ntonso in Ghana. You can see Gabriel Boache here is the head of this little group. Just passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately. But here he is getting bark from a tree, the body tree, and they boil down that bark in these huge vats. And then once that's boiled down, they strain out the remaining bark, and you're left with this ink. And they stamp that ink onto cloth in these symbols that are called a dinkra. And if you come to the African Bead Museum in Detroit, and I hope you will, you'll see these adinkra symbols all over the place in, sculpture and painting and whatnot. Each symbol has a different meaning. This one happens to be two crocodiles. So here's the head of the crocodile and the feet, and here's the other head of the crocodile and the feet, and they share the same stomach. And the saying that goes with this symbol is, why do we fight? By feeding you, I feed myself, right? So it's this wonderful symbol of mutuality, mutual aid. And that's exactly the way that this sort of circular economy works. So once you've strained out that bark, you've taken the pigment out of it, that goes back into the ground as compost or into what's called the sacred forest, where there's just a little, area that nobody takes anything from. And that's a kind of biodiversity hotspot. So there's monkeys and birds and all kinds of things that you won't see anywhere else in those sacred forests. And of course, those monkeys and birds leave that area and they poop out the seed in these little fertilizer packets. And so that biodiversity helps places like this where the body tree bark is growing. So the whole thing works in this beautiful circular economy. And that's just the ecological circle. There's also labor circles, right? So you're returning value to those who generate it, whether those are humans or non-humans. So chatting with Dobbles about these seed plants and this African, we call it generative justice, right? A regenerative economy system. We decided it'd be really cool if we could create a greenhouse that could grow some of these African plants in Detroit. Now, by coincidence, I had done a little bit of a greenhouse structure when I was last in Ghana. And it wasn't my intention to do so. I was showing the students at Kwame Nkrumah University, here's a couple of them here, showing them some of these simulations we had done for fractals and other kinds of structures in African traditional design. I was actually showing them Native American designs because we've also worked with the Anishinaabe groups here in Michigan, Potawatomi and Ojibwe and so on. We've done some simulations for them of the longhouse, the wigwam. So I happened to have some of those around and they said, oh, we could use those to make African housing designs. And so they took one of these traditional African houses and made this design out of it. And they had brought up the connection to greenhouses, right? So I thought that was such a neat connection. I mentioned it to Dobbles. I said, we could use this as the model. Here you've got an African design, right, for a greenhouse. So this is a little photo of me showing him the design on the screen at that particular moment. So I happen to be teaching a seminar in the Masters in Design program at University of Michigan that semester. And so I assigned this problem to the students. I said, okay, so we've got one structure, but that's not necessarily the one that Dobbles wants. So I want you to create a space of possibilities. So you can see that as you go across horizontally here, this gets greater and greater curvature. And as you go vertically down, this gets squeezed at the ends more and more, right? You have more and more of a scaling effect as you go down. And so if you think of that as a two-dimensional plane, we're only showing you 9 here, but there's an infinite number, right, of possible designs you can get just by those two variables, how much it curves by and how much it scales down by. And so then we asked Dobbles, well, what do you like the best? What appeals to you? So he was, of course, focused on the beadwork, but he pointed out that one of the bead designs, they call them elbow beads because it has this bend in it. One of the bead designs looks a lot like some of these shapes. And so he settled on that as the design for the greenhouse. Now, once he said that, I said, well, wait a minute, where does that elbow bead inspiration come from, right? And it turned out to be an African imitation of things like the horns you would see on a bull or a ram, a male sheep. So there was lots of neat sort of movement back and forth across these different formations. Anyways, once we had that, we got some funding from the University of Michigan to hire local folks with the promise that we would integrate opportunities for students to work with the locals. And so here you can see our construction crew here, a couple of students from University of Michigan, a couple of local folks here, one of the locals and one of the students just kind of palling around. So there was a lot of neat opportunity there to just do a little, mutual aid across the class lines, as it were. The local folks, of course, were not engineering students. They were just local folks that needed some work. And so doing something like a 2D blueprint was really challenging, but we found that 3D printing it, that gave you a model. And so you could say, oh, okay, this thing here, that's what I'm making here. That really helped a lot in making some of those connections. And here's one of the local folks blessing up on top of the ladder. We did this at Christmas time. He wanted to send out, a little Christmas photo of what we were up to. Joy to the world, I think, was the caption they had put on that. All right. And then once we got close to having this thing finished, I was running a little STEM education program for high school students locally. And so we had brought them over to the Bead Museum as well. And my wife, Professor Bennett, teaches graphic design at University of Michigan. So she was teaching them some graphic design techniques. I was doing sort of the STEM part of it. But I asked some of the students, would you like to work on the vents? So we need these things to open up when it gets too hot and close down when the thing is too cold. So here they are trying to take a non-motorized vent and motorize it, turn it into a little vent robot. So that was a pretty fun project. Unfortunately, I didn't get it completed in time. So there's still some work to be done there, but you'll see the holes for where it's going to go when you come out and visit. And here's the whole crew of the high school students, again with Dobbles, and we were just starting to bring in the plants at that point. And here Dobbles and I are standing in front of it. This is my wife and her two sisters. We had been growing these the bead plants here, Job's Tears, and here we're stringing them up, you can see. And then finally, we did, this wasn't actually a photograph of the solar array. We just photoshopped that in so folks could see where the solar array would be in relation to where the greenhouse was. But we've put in the Funtun Funafu, the twin crocodiles, because that was really, the principle at work here, right? It's not sharing food, it's sharing energy. But when the museum needs to use electricity, it can use it. When the greenhouse needs to use electricity, it's there for the greenhouse to use as well. And I will now switch over to John.
Thanks, Ron. Certainly a bummer that Dobbles can't be here with us. He is the heart and soul of this operation. Before we even talk about the solar, I challenge or, ask anybody that's interested to go down and have a moment in this kind of special place that he has been, putting his creative energy into for many years now. And my favorite fact about this project itself is that the African Bead Museum gets the most international web search traffic in Detroit, right? So it is a big deal for Detroit because we actually get international visitors just to come and see this place. So a whole ton of history here to go and explore, and a real nice place to just kind of get away. My name is John, like everybody's mentioned here. I'm with Michigan Solar Solutions. I supported Ron and Dobbles by executing on this project for them. And so what you're looking at there is 12 405 watt 72 cell solar modules. They're on an Iron Ridge rail system using a OMG power grip mounting to their roof there. And so they have an east sloped roof, low slope pitch, just about a 212 or less on this roof. And with the size of the system, to meet the budget to get this done, we elected not to actually tilt this to the south, being we had the limited space and lesser economies of scale. It made more sense to flush mount to the east and still get a majority of their generation. So this system is using an N-phase IQ7A microinverter for its power electronic. Many of you may be familiar with that, and we'll take a look at the monitoring there short after. Unique challenges with this project would be, in general, the mounting type. This is a atypical mounting, if you will, when it comes to a commercial, generally speaking, flat style roof. Usually we don't penetrate these roofs, but in this case, it was the best option. So it uses a compression style disc technology that flattens out an already bowed disc to water seal the actual connection. So the other thing that was a question for us out the get-go was, how much power will the greenhouse use? It was really just coming into the infancy of its existence. And the goal, again, being that they wanted to have enough power for both the historic use of the museum space and the new use of the greenhouse space. So this system was built last summer, brought online in September, October-ish, and will just be in its first year of production this year. You can go ahead and switch to the next slide. All right, so I pulled together a couple of snips from the monitoring platform for you all to view of the last couple days. And what I want to point out about the 8th of March is that even an east-facing array at a 212 pitch can still get a very nice production curve over the course of the day, right? Typically, we see these beautiful production curves in terms of the blue area that you see on the screen with a south-facing array. But even an east-facing array at a low slope can still produce a very similar production curve throughout the day. So what you see here is they also have a consumption monitoring associated with the assets, so to show what they're using alongside what the system is producing. Next. All right, a little bit of a different day. I wanted to bring this one out because it shows more of a later day production curve. Again, not something you would typically associate with an east-facing array, but just really showing that majority of production is weather-based. And depending on the weather that day is going to drive the majority of your production results. Next. And I wanted to pull one more here because I think that what I'm looking at here is those fans running and the greenhouse using some of the electricity in this case. Doesn't seem to be every day, Ron, but I am seeing that there is some load that comes on there. And this is a really good view because you can see how in a day like this, they used all their solar on site. They didn't send anything to the grid and therefore reduced the stress on the grid just by having the small solar installation. Next photo, slide. All right, so here's some of the hardware from the system. Starting on the right-hand side there, you can see the AC circuit coming down from the 2-story roof to the N-phase combiner. So those are AC circuits from the solar panels. There's 2 strings up there, so there's 2 20-amp breakers in that combiner, also housing the Envoy and CT equipment. That runs to an AC disconnect, which is required by the utility as a first means of disconnecting for a first responder. And then you can see that that goes right on in to the outdoor rated disconnect, which we have tapped for this system. So this is a line side connection. This is not a load side connection. So the connection is not breaker fed from the main panel, but rather tapped at the main service conductors. All right, I think that that's the last slide we've got here.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, was Davos able to join us, or we're going to go with questions?
I'm not seeing doubles on here.
Okay. my first question, Ron, is what got you involved with the African culture? You've been traveling, you said, a lot back and forth, and with your history of working with the culture. We were chatting a little bit about how we can learn so much from other cultures that haven't been so deeply tied to technology, and that helping return back to the simpler times. Maybe you can share a little bit of that story with us. You've got a lot, I know, to tell about it.
I can share you both verbally and visually. I did my undergrad in cybernetics and my master's in systems engineering, and I worked in the Silicon Valley for a little bit, and then I went back to school to get my doctorate in the history of consciousness program, where Angela Davis and some other folks who were really thinking in terms, of social justice were working. And I was struggling to put together that engineering background with the social justice stuff, and happened across this observation that when you look at African villages, you see fractals, you see circles of circles of circles, or you see rectangles of rectangles of rectangles. And at first I just thought, well, coral reefs are fractals, bushes are fractals, right? Nature does these things from the bottom up. And so maybe the Africans just have this unconscious bottom-up social dynamic. But once I got there and started interviewing folks, it turned out that it was quite deliberate. So this particular structure is the Palace of the Chief in Logombirni in Cameroon. And I went there and photographed that. And then I asked them about it, and they took me over to the royal insignia, and there it is. It's a rectangle inside of a rectangle inside of a rectangle. So they were quite aware of the fact that it had this scaling structure to it. And that's what I found over and over again, is that every time I spotted one of these fractals, when I did a little bit of inquiry, it would turn out there was some kind of symbolic system at work, right? So I did a book titled African Fractals. And various folks have used it in literature, and there's a fractal building now in Ethiopia that was based off the book. In Canada, there's a design school, OCAD, that did a Black Fractals conference a few years ago. And Eddie Okafor has a science fiction novel. I didn't know about it. She wrote to me and said, I've been reading your stuff, and in my book, this young girl finds this fractal in Africa, and the whole thing there. So that's been where my research has been going on this. But I really wanted to do something very practical. And so the project that we were doing in Ghana was really taking that ink production. And then I had some of the students at Kwame Nkrumah University create this solar cooker out of it. So solar was sort of on my mind as part of the repertoire of the tools we can bring to bear to try to provide a more circular economy, more social justice, more egalitarian relationships in our environmental systems and economic systems and so on. So that's where that connection came from.
That is really terrific. We know how the sun provides enough energy in 1 hour for the whole planet, right? For a year. And other cultures and civilizations obviously have known this for millennia, that the sun is the power for everything. So now that we have solar panels, we can really harvest that energy in a way that can help make a better case for preserving. You had mentioned earlier how that solar panel was damaged in a storm, and I thought, well, there's climate change, just coming right on the heels of all the good work that's being done. John, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got interested in solar?
You're talking to me, I assume.
Yes, I am.
How I got interested in solar,
Well,
or
how your work in solar is part of the changing community.
yeah, of course. You know, I thought it was really, it was a no-brainer for Ron to include solar in this project, with Davos being in a position to host and support the creation of the greenhouse. It just made sense, right, to pair them up, knowing that that greenhouse was going to bring that business, which is important in this community for the cultural and the economic reality that it is, to share in having a solar system. So I think that that's like a really strong, a really strong point there. For us at Michigan Solar Solutions, it is about changing that energy paradigm, giving people access to energy on site for their needs. And sometimes the need is to continue maintaining a cultural pillar in the community. And that's the need that was filled here.
I'm going to make sure everybody knows where it is. If you're not in Detroit, well, if you are a Detroit resident, but if you're not familiar with Detroit, we have a major freeway, the 96 freeway that cuts through downtown. That I think connects to 696 way out there eventually, but it's by the crossroads of Grand River and the Boulevard, West Grand Boulevard. And if you Google Detroit African Bead Museum, you will find the website and all the information about the organization. They do a lot of tours. They're just incredibly welcoming people to share this really incredible, what's our word, Ron? I'm not saying it right. Funuti. What is the word that the shared knowledge?
It's a tongue twister. Funtun funufu.
Okay. Well, okay. I'm not going to try it again. Funtun funutu. Well, I did it. But I just love that community. And in Detroit, that's what so many of our nonprofits are doing now, is really trying to connect to one another in that collaboration between your neighborhood, the incredible gardening programs we have in Detroit now, with food production and with greenhouses. And so more and more are working on getting their solar into those greenhouses. We had a solar story a year ago about one of the greenhouses that got one of the rural grants out of USDA, the only urban one, but they were able to get one of those grants. I think what we can do is open it up for questions. Anybody have any questions about the system? We were talking earlier, John, about if the power goes out, does the power go out on the system as well, or were you able to bypass that?
This system will not respond in a grid outage. It is grid tied only.
Okay, so they would be, was there any consideration for battery, or it was just out of the price range? Because it seems like a lot is getting sent
it
down.
was entirely a price range issue. We've been considering experimenting with batteries a little bit, but haven't installed any yet.
Okay, is there, are you
I think
aware of
Dave Curtis has his hand up.
Okay, let's see. Oh, thank you, Dave. Go ahead, you're on mute. Good.
Thank you, guys. Question for both of you, I guess, is what's next in your endeavors, solar-wise, or with any renewable energy?
John?
Sure. Dave, can you specify just a little bit for me where you want me to go with that? Because there's a big ocean of stuff out there that I could give you. There's so much positives going on in the solar industry and renewables in general. Can you help me
Sure,
understand?
sure. I mean, you personally, that you, projects that you have in mind.
Sure. Yeah, for me personally, it'll be continuing putting more projects like this down. I think that oftentimes projects like this are overlooked by solar companies in terms of the value. Doing a project like this in terms of my larger commercial portfolio of work at our business, it doesn't match necessarily. However, it doesn't mean a customer like Ron or the MBAD Museum should be overlooked, right? Because this, even though it's a small project, it's only 12 panels, it's a difficult project, right? We've got a site that's in a historically difficult permitting authority. We've got a site that has been afforded some leniency in terms of the building, the use of the land, the codes, and the permitting because of the cultural relevance and the location of the building. So, in general, I think that this is a really important project for people not to overlook and not to bypass because of those difficult things. So we're hoping to take on more projects like this because it really impacts people, right? There's only a few people that work and live in this ecosystem and pay these bills, and it's going to make a big difference to them.
And as I mentioned earlier, John is a member of our Renewable Energy Committee here in Detroit for the Green Task Force, and he has done quite a few solar assessments free of charge for churches and nonprofits in Detroit. And so we are looking forward to, now that the tax laws have changed, being able to install on a number of those there's smaller projects and projects that maybe just wouldn't necessarily pencil out, but are just as important as any other one. So I appreciate John's willingness to work with us on these types of projects. So it's heartening to hear. So we have, Ron, were you going to maybe tell us your next steps of where you have?
No. I was just pointing out there was a couple of questions in chat for John.
We have a few geek questions, apparently.
Yeah.
So why line side tap for a small array like this? For John.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was because of the location of the main service panel and where the rest of the equipment was going to go. So, in general, when you have an outdoor rated enclosure or component like your AC disconnect or your combiner panel, you want to place it outside if you don't have a battery as well going in that situation, because it allows for easier serviceability, right? We can now service this asset without going indoors. And so without, having an image to show you, the main service panel was probably about 40 feet up the building and then into a downstairs smaller compartment. And, quite frankly, it was best that the inspector inspected our system out there than rather inspect on that main service panel because of the condition of the building. So it made sense for us to stay outside with all of our equipment. And we as part of the project, we had to add that disconnect out there, the main service disconnect, because there should have been a service disconnect outside before going into the main. So we were already there doing that work, and it just made sense to throw this in there as well.
Thank you. That's clear. Appreciate it.
Okay. Ron, I'm wondering if you saw, Clayton, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I noticed that you have 2 meters on site. Why do you have that?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, but I believe that attached to the building, there is also a small residential unit.
That's correct.
That was recently built out. I think that there's a clothes reseller there. Is that correct?
That's the daughter of Dobbles.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Not just any clothing retailer.
John Server, you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question for John. Just how often do you run into problems, kind of I mean, Detroit's an older community, where have some older buildings where, I know when I put in my first solar system, the electrical inspector would say, hey, this is a major change. So you've got to upgrade this, upgrade that. I go, oh, wait a minute. Is that a frequent problem? And it sounds like you were able to skirt it for the Bead Museum.
We definitely do our best to hedge against the risk because, in general, an electrical inspector can hold you responsible for anything outside code during your inspection, even if it doesn't have anything to do with you. As long as they're there and they notice it, they'll stop you up until you get get that fixed and get it across. So, with this site, we had a couple inspections. We picked up a couple things that weren't necessarily associated with the solar system. And I know that that was appreciated from their end. And, ultimately, the inspector can always find something out of code if they want to, right? If you put your mind to it, you're going to go find something. So, at a certain point, we were able to appease the requirements and make them comfortable that we had done as much as we were going to do. So, yeah, you raise a good point there, and it is valid.
And in Detroit, we have a double inspection. We have a building inspection as well as the electrical inspection, right? So if one doesn't catch something, the other one will. So it is a little more challenging in Detroit for these permits exactly for that reason. With the building inspector, in my case, I had shrubbery growing to hide the electrical boxes at one point, and they were like, no, that's got to go. And I was like, well, why? Well, because you have to be able to see it. So that double inspection and the fees charged are a little higher in Detroit, actually a lot higher in Detroit, like compared to Ann Arbor for all these inspections. So that does add up. Ron, you mentioned how neighborhood people were involved in the project. Do you know if there's been more interest in solar in the neighborhood, or how has that generated into more interest in the project in general?
I think the solar part of it barely registers on anyone's conscience. So they love going inside the greenhouse and seeing the African plants. And we've had not just international visitors, but visitors from Africa. So there's a group from Senegal that came in, and I lived a little bit for a little while in Senegal, so I was able to say hi to them in Wolof. But everybody's so fixated on the plants that when I try to explain Funtun Funafu and solar, and it just it's noise.
Funtu Funatu. We're all going to learn that word before it's over.
Okay, let's do it. Fun.
Foon.
Tune.
Tune. Like tuna fish. Funtun.
Funafu.
Funafu. Fun,
Yeah.
tune, funafu.
Yeah.
Okay. We love it.
Well, we'll have you speaking Shri in no time.
I'm trying to practice Greek right now, so I've got enough on my plate. Any more questions out there about the project, about what are visiting hours if somebody does want to drop in? I see that John Jevahirian did put the website. Thank you.
Yeah, Dobbles gets
chat?
there. Dobbles gets there around noon, and he usually leaves around 5 or 6.
Okay. So there's
every day except Sunday.
and you can tour the site, see the sculpture garden, and you can kind of see it from the freeway too. That
You can
visible.
it's got so many mirrors on it. He
Yeah,
loves breaking
yeah,
up mirrors. You can see it from the air. When
Yeah.
airplanes fly over, they say, "Oh, that's the
That
African
building."
Bead Museum." Yeah, it's literally a
Yeah.
jewel in
Yeah.
the crown of Detroit.
But it doesn't blind you. Clayton, another question.
Yeah, just a quick question. I may have missed this, What's the KVA size of the installation?
John, was it 3 kilowatt hours or 3 kilowatts?
If I think it's 4.86 is
Oh,
your
4.86. Okay.
0.16 is your AC. You can do your math real quick. It would be 12 microinverters, IQ7As, so they got a 349 watt output. So 4,188 watts is the total AC rating. So 4.18 VA, if you will.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. And servicing both the greenhouse and the house. So you must have had to trench out quite a bit to get it over to the building. Any other questions? Who thinks they're going to go visit? Oh, wait, we have Carol. How long does it take to tour the site, and is there a charge?
There is no charge, and it's one of the things that immediately attracted me to this place, was the fact that we call it a bead museum, but it's really just the little shop where Dobble sells his beadwork, and then an outdoor sculpture garden that you can just wander into whenever you want. The bead shop doesn't have to be open for you to go in there, and it's such a delight. You know, I'm often there, and we had a marching band once when one of the local high schools decided they were going to practice in there. There's all sorts of city celebrations, the Juneteenth celebration that'll go in the vacant lot that's adjacent to it, and so those folks will spill into the garden. So it really is, you know, just this very open, free space, both financially but also just in spirit. You go there and you're like, oh, that's what art is for. It's not meant to be, you know, put behind bars inside these glass cases with security guards around as if it's some kind of art prison.
Yeah.
Right? Art should be about freedom. This is what it's about.
And an experience for everyone to share. So that's what we love about Detroit, right? Is that there's these pockets throughout the city of these people that have come together to have different expressions of art and music and gardens and just so many wonderful things. So we've really enjoyed being able to share with people the different really interesting ways that solar has been used to enhance projects like this and the gardens and artwork in general. So I think that if we have any more questions, otherwise we might be able to let everyone get going a little bit early tonight. Any questions? Any more questions? I'm looking. Okay, then we're going to wrap it up. So thank you so much, John and Ron, for sharing with us this wonderful project. I've really been looking forward to having this chance to share it with others. We will keep enjoying more Detroit stories in the future, right? So with Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association and others that participate in this, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.